A single dad texted the wrong number by mistake, but the reply he got changed everything. What started with an error became the beginning of real love. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Mark Smith awoke to a persistent beep from the alarm clock on his nightstand, its glowing red numbers reminding him it was already 6:30 a.m. He rubbed his eyes, still heavy from the late hours spent grading tests the previous night. At 38, Mark carried the subtle signs of a man who had learned to juggle too many responsibilities, the faint lines around his brown eyes, a streak of silver sneaking through his otherwise dark hair, and a perpetual tightness in his shoulders. He sighed, pulling himself out of bed, determined to start the day on a positive note. Within minutes, he was in the kitchen of his modest two-story home in Oak Ridge, a middle-class suburb just outside Boston. The early sunlight trickled through the half-closed blinds, revealing a cluttered countertop of cereal boxes, stray pencil cases, and a pile of ungraded math quizzes. The smell of coffee filled the air as Mark poured himself a cup, mentally organizing the many tasks before him. He had the usual morning rush, getting his 8-year-old son, Lucas, fed, dressed, and ready for school, plus one new challenge. He needed to confirm an afternoon meeting with a prospective babysitter. Balancing fatherhood and his job as a high school math teacher had become more daunting ever since his wife left 2 years ago. Lucas, 8 years old with tousled blonde hair, a smattering of freckles and boundless energy, bounded into the kitchen. "Dad, can I have waffles?" he asked, grabbing a carton of orange juice from the fridge. Before Mark could respond, the boy tripped on a stray sneaker. A split second later, the orange juice slipped from Lucas's hands and splashed across the table, drenching Mark's phone in the process. "Lucas!" Mark exclaimed, half in exasperation, half in concern. He quickly set his coffee cup aside and grabbed the nearest towel, dabbing at the phone's screen. Droplets clung to it stubbornly, the device flickering ominously. Mark's heart sank at the thought of replacing another phone. Money was already tight, and he was relying on that phone to coordinate everything with the new babysitter. "I'm sorry," Lucas murmured, his eyes downcast. Mark's frustration softened. He reached out and tousled the boy's hair. "I know, buddy. Accidents happen. Let's see if we can salvage this before it completely dies." Carefully powering off the phone, Mark placed it on the counter, hoping it might still work later. The morning continued in a chaotic flurry. Lucas spilled cereal on the floor. Mark's coffee turned cold while he cleaned up, and the phone refused to turn on for a solid 10 minutes. Despite the stress, Mark tried to keep calm for Lucas's sake. Since Rebecca, his ex-wife, had left, Mark had been extra careful about controlling his temper. He knew Lucas felt the absence keenly. The boy struggled with concentration in school, and Mark often worried that he wasn't doing enough as both father and mother. Just as they were about to leave, the phone buzzed to life. Its screen was cracked near the edge, but still functional. A text notification popped up, a reminder that the new babysitter candidate would visit later in the afternoon. Mark exhaled a small sigh of relief. He grabbed his briefcase and guided Lucas out to their slightly dented sedan. As they drove to Lucas's elementary school, Mark's mind drifted to the conversation with the principal of his own school. There was a problematic student in his math class, a teenager named Jacob, whose behavior had escalated recently. Jacob's constant disruptions and defiance were testing Mark's patience, and the principal wanted a plan of action by the week's end. It was just one more responsibility piled onto Mark's plate. Dropping Lucas off, Mark kissed his son on the forehead and watched him run into the schoolyard. A pang of guilt flickered in his chest. He wished he had more time to invest in Lucas's emotional needs. But for now, He had to rush to the high school across town, face his rowdy 10th graders, and pray that his half-damaged phone would hold out until he could confirm everything with the new babysitter. Late that evening, after sorting through a mountain of quizzes and making dinner, Mark tucked Lucas into bed. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Staring at his phone's cracked screen, Mark felt a wave of loneliness. He couldn't remember the last time he had a real conversation that wasn't about homework, groceries, or finding childcare. Sinking into the sofa, he wondered if this was all his life had become, a series of tasks rather than genuine connections. Little did he know that one small text message typed on that damaged phone would soon change everything. Julie Walker sat in the drab office of Bright House Publishing for the last time, her heart pounding. After 7 years of dedicated work editing children's books, she was being dismissed, just like that. The neutral expression on her boss's face stung more than any harsh words could have. She gathered her red curls into a loose ponytail, trying to maintain composure, but her green eyes betrayed her shock. "Well," said Richard Thompson, her 50-year-old supervisor with a graying mustache and a tone that bordered on dismissive, "we appreciate your contributions, but the company's financial cuts are severe. We have to let you go." His voice was businesslike, devoid of warmth. Julie nodded mutely, her pride stinging. She knew the company was downsizing, but she hadn't expected her position to be on the chopping block. She left the office with a few cardboard boxes filled with personal items, a desk plant, some sticky notes shaped like cartoon animals, and a photo of her and her mother on a rare vacation years ago. By the time she reached her small apartment in Cambridge, a cold rain had begun to fall. The droplets tapped against the window while she set down the boxes in her cramped living room. She flicked on a lamp, revealing walls lined with bookshelves brimming with whimsical illustrations and manuscripts. Each book represented a world she had helped shape, and now she had no idea what would come next. Julie's phone remained silent. No comforting messages from co-workers, no job offers, not even a friendly text from an old acquaintance. At 35, she felt entirely alone. Her close friends had drifted away, pursuing their own dreams or families. She had spent most of her evenings and weekends at the office, never prioritizing her personal life. Now, she was beginning to realize just how isolated she'd become. She changed into sweatpants, sank into her worn-out couch, and stared at the rain hitting the window. A half-finished bottle of cheap red wine on the kitchen counter beckoned. She thought about pouring herself a glass, but paused, uncertain if it would soothe or only deepen her sadness. Instead, she picked up her phone, almost out of habit, to check for messages. Nothing. That silence felt heavier than any thunderstorm outside. Suddenly, the phone lit up. The soft vibration startled her. The message preview read, "Hey, just wanted to say thanks for agreeing to watch Lucas. My son means the world to me. It's a relief to know someone will care about him while I'm at work." The text went on for a few more lines, full of warmth and gratitude, yet she had no idea who Lucas was or who had sent the message. Confused, Julie opened the message fully. It was from a number she didn't recognize, and the sender seemed to believe she was a new babysitter. Something in the text, maybe the gentle tone of a worried parent or the mention of how much this child changed his life, brought a lump to her throat. Here was someone who clearly valued family above all else, writing to the wrong person. Instead of ignoring it, Julie typed back, "I'm sorry, but I think you might have the wrong number. That said, your message really touched me. Lucas is lucky to have a dad who cares so much." For a few moments, she wondered if the message would even go through. The idea of a misdialed number left her oddly comforted. It made her feel less invisible, as if fate had nudged her with a fleeting sign that there were still caring people in the world. She set the phone on the cushion beside her, uncertain if she'd get a reply. Outside, the rain intensified, rattling the windows. Julie stared at the small puddle forming on the sill, her thoughts racing over everything she'd lost that day. Perhaps it was foolish to respond to a stranger, but the sincerity in his words had sparked a glimmer of hope inside her. She could almost feel her heart stirring, as if reminding her that she was still capable of connecting with another human being, even if, for now, it was all by chance. Later that same evening, Mark paced back and forth in his bedroom, phone in hand. The scuffed hardwood floor creaked under his weight. He was mortified to realize his message about Lucas had gone to the wrong number. The new babysitter's area code was supposed to be 617, but he'd typed 671 in haste on his cracked phone screen. Now, some stranger had read his heartfelt text. He was about to delete the conversation when the phone buzzed. A response. With a twinge of embarrassment, Mark opened it, already rehearsing an apology in his head. He almost expected an annoyed reply or complete silence. Instead, the words he saw made him pause. "I'm sorry, but I think you might have the wrong number. Lucas is lucky to have a dad who cares so much." A warmth spread through him. Despite this person's confusion, they recognized the love he had poured into that message. He quickly typed back, "I'm so sorry. I was trying to text my new babysitter. Apologies for bothering you." His thumb hovered over the send button. Should he add more? Hesitating, he finally pressed send, feeling a mix of relief and lingering awkwardness. On the other side of town, Julie's phone chimed again. Reading Mark's apology, she felt a pang of empathy. She sat cross-legged on her couch, the rain continuing to lash the windows behind her. Her day had been dismal, but here was someone inadvertently sharing a bit of honest, everyday tenderness. Without overthinking, she typed back, "No bother at all. I had a tough day and your text made me smile. I'm Julie, by the way." Mark stared at that last sentence on his screen, "I'm Julie," wondering if he should reveal his own name. He realized he was oddly curious about this stranger who admitted to having a bad day. There was something freeing in talking to someone who had no idea about his history or baggage. In a moment of uncharacteristic spontaneity, he responded, "I'm Mark. Sorry to hear your day was rough. I hope tomorrow's better." A slow, cautious conversation bloomed. They kept their exchanges polite, but each message carried a small revelation. Julie found herself telling Mark that she'd lost her job earlier that day, and that the future felt uncertain. Mark, in turn, confessed he was a high school math teacher juggling single fatherhood. He talked about Lucas, a bright, energetic boy who had his own struggles dealing with his mum's absence. The night wore on, and still the conversation flowed. Every now and then, Mark had to pause to check on Lucas, who'd stirred in his bed. Each time he returned, he noticed another message from Julie waiting. She wrote about loving children's literature, about her dream to write a picture book someday. He found himself opening up about the joys and challenges of teaching math to teens who sometimes cared more about their phones than their education. A gentle hush filled both their worlds. In Mark's dimly lit bedroom, the moon shone through a gap in the curtains. He felt an unexpected calm wash over him. Meanwhile, in Julie's apartment, the rain had slowed to a faint trickle, as though giving them space to talk. After an hour, Mark realized he hadn't asked the woman a crucial question. "Why'd you respond if you knew it was a wrong number?" he typed, honestly curious. Julie's reply glowed on his screen a moment later. "Because sometimes a kind message is exactly what you need to see, even if it wasn't meant for you." He smiled at the phone, feeling a sudden urge to keep this small window of connection open. Usually he was reserved, but something about the anonymity relaxed him. "Well," he wrote, "thank you for understanding." Believe it or not, chatting with a stranger actually helped me today, Julie responded almost immediately. Funny. I feel the same. Maybe mistakes aren't always mistakes. Mark put down the phone with a quiet sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he felt less alone. And though they each had no idea what the other looked like or who they truly were, both felt the first stirrings of a companionship that neither had expected to find. Over the next few weeks, Mark and Julie developed a curious late-night routine. After putting Lucas to bed and finishing his lesson plans, Mark would thumb through his phone, anticipating a simple, "Hey, how was your day?" from Julie. She, in turn, found herself looking forward to these messages, often after grueling afternoons searching for new jobs or polishing her resume. Their conversation remained purely through text, yet it began to feel surprisingly intimate. One breezy Friday evening, Mark propped up his phone on the kitchen counter while washing dishes. Ping. He dried his hands hurriedly to see Julie's message. "I had another disappointing interview today. They said they're looking for someone with more digital marketing experience. I just feel lost." Mark frowned sympathetically. He typed back, "I'm sorry, Julie. But from what I know, you've got a real talent with children's stories. Don't give up on that dream." Lucas, in his pajamas, wandered into the kitchen, sniffling. "Dad, my throat hurts," he complained. Mark put aside the phone to fetch some children's cold medicine. 10 minutes later, he was tucking Lucas in again and promising to check on him throughout the night. By the time Mark returned to his phone, there was another message from Julie, sharing a bit more about her fears of unemployment and how she worried she'd been too focused on her old job to build relationships outside of it. Mark felt compelled to respond with honesty. "I know a little about feeling alone. Ever since my ex-wife left 2 years ago, it's been just me and Lucas. Some days, it's like I'm watching life from behind a glass wall, just passing time until the next crisis." He hesitated before sending. Rarely did he admit such vulnerability, but something in Julie's words made him feel safe. The phone chimed again moments later. "I'm really sorry you went through that," she wrote. "I can't imagine what that kind of betrayal feels like. At least you have Lucas, right?" Mark gazed into the hallway, where a faint nightlight glowed outside his son's room. "He's my world," he replied, "but sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for him." As days turned into weeks, they began to share more personal confessions. Julie talked about her family, how her mother lived across the country and was too wrapped up in her own life to visit often. Mark opened up about a particularly challenging student, Jacob Bao, who disrupted his math classes. Late one evening, Julie sent him a thoughtful paragraph with tips on engaging reluctant learners, suggesting creative ways to spark their interest. Mark marveled at her emotional intelligence. It was as if she understood both children and adults on a deeper level. The new babysitter, Sarah Jenkins, had entered the scene in real life. She was a no-nonsense 42-year-old with short blonde hair, hired after a few false starts. While Mark appreciated Sarah's reliable help, he found his mind drifting to Julie's messages whenever he had a free moment. He was aware of the strangeness, connecting more profoundly with a person he only knew through a phone. Yet that very distance seemed to make honesty easier. Julie also hinted at her own doubts about meeting Mark in person. Some nights, her thumb hovered over the keyboard, almost typing, "Want to grab a coffee?" But she always backed out at the last second, worried that meeting face-to-face would shatter the fragile bond they'd built. She wasn't sure if she could handle another disappointment. Instead, they spoke of everyday matters: Mark's busy schedule at the high school, Lucas's upcoming birthday, or Julie's ongoing job hunt. They even traded silly jokes to lighten the mood on especially stressful evenings. One Thursday, as midnight approached, Julie finally typed what had been on her mind. Isn't it odd that we talk every day but haven't actually seen each other? Sometimes I wonder if we're better off staying like this, safe behind our screens. Mark read it twice before replying, I understand the fear, but part of me wants to know the real you, not just your words. Julie stared at the glowing text on her screen, heart pounding. For a brief moment, she nearly asked him to meet. Instead, she deleted that thought, sending a non-committal, maybe, let's see how things go. And so, both found themselves caught in the comfort and the limits of digital confessions, unsure of when or how to take the next step. A crisp autumn breeze brushed through Oak Ridge Park, rustling the bright orange leaves strewn across the grass. Julie sat alone on a nearly hidden wooden bench, phone gripped in her hand, tears stinging her eyes. She had just ended a call with the manager of the local bookstore. Second chapter. Another rejection. They appreciated her resume, but someone with more direct sales experience had snagged the role she desperately needed. After all the rejections, Julie felt like a boat adrift with no anchor in sight. She glanced around, hoping no one would witness her moment of vulnerability. But the park was relatively empty, the playground area dotted with only a few families. Her gaze drifted to a father and son at the far end of the park, though she couldn't quite see them clearly through the branches. Sniffling, she tried to compose herself, but the frustration, the fear of an uncertain future, and the mounting loneliness overwhelmed her. A sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. She buried her face in her hands, missing the approach of a concerned stranger. "Excuse me," came a gentle voice. "Are you all right? Do you need any help?" Startled, Julie looked up to see a man about her age, maybe a bit older, with warm brown eyes and a hint of silver threading through his dark hair. Standing beside him was a boy with sandy blonde hair and freckles, holding onto a small soccer ball. "No, I'm fine," Julie managed to say, quickly wiping her cheeks. She noticed the man's concern, genuine and unintrusive, but the embarrassment of being caught crying flared within her. "Really, I'm okay," she insisted, forcing a weak smile. The man hesitated, then glanced at the boy. "We can leave you be if you'd prefer. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." His tone was soft, filled with a compassion that momentarily melted Julie's guard. Yet she was so raw from rejection, so tired of feeling exposed, that she merely shook her head in polite dismissal. "Thank you," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "But I'm fine." "I promise." The father nodded respectfully. The boy frowned, tugging on his dad's jacket sleeve. "Dad, maybe we should—" But the man gently guided the child away, whispering something Julie couldn't make out. Only when they were gone did she notice the small tissue the man had left on the bench beside her, folded neatly. She inhaled shakily, almost laughing through her tears at the simple kindness. Even so, her pride ached from having been seen in such a vulnerable state. Unaware that this was the very father she'd been texting for weeks, her wrong number confidant, she watched him leave, grateful for his concern, but relieved he didn't press further. If she had known it was Mark, she might have felt an entirely different surge of emotions. But their faces were still hidden to each other in the realm of phone screens, and fate had orchestrated this encounter without either recognizing the other. Later that night, back in her apartment, Julie still felt the sting of the bookstore's rejection. She typed a long message to Mark about her painful day, purposely leaving out the detail of crying in public. She simply wrote, "Had a rough time today at the park after bad news. A kind stranger offered help, but I guess I wasn't ready to accept any." Meanwhile, at his own home, Mark read her text, thinking about the woman he and Lucas had spotted earlier, sobbing on a secluded bench. He vaguely mentioned in his reply, "I ran into a lady who looked pretty upset at Oak Ridge Park, tried to help, but she didn't want it. I wish I could have done more." Both paused, each realizing they had seen someone in pain that day. Neither suspecting it was the other, they typed out their sympathies, each confessing how loneliness could grip someone so easily. Julie admitted she felt foolish for crying in a public space. Mark sympathized, recalling times he'd felt equally vulnerable, especially after his ex-wife's departure. In the silence of her apartment, Julie wiped a stray tear, reflecting on how she let a stranger's kindness slip away. Little did she know that in mere weeks, the one who had offered that tissue would become far more than just a figure in the distance. For now, though, they remained in separate worlds, connected in spirit yet separated by misunderstanding, even as life's invisible threads continued, quietly weaving them together. Despite the chill of early November creeping in through the cracks of their respective homes, Mark and Julie found warmth in the late-night messages they continued to exchange. Under the dim glow of a single bedside lamp, Mark pulled up the conversation on his phone. A few hours ago, he'd put Lucas to bed, though the boy had insisted on reading a chapter of a new book first. Now, his house felt quiet and still. This nightly silence had once been suffocating, but nowadays it was becoming a space where he felt safe enough to voice the thoughts he rarely dared share with anyone else. On the other side of Boston, Julie sat curled up in a blanket on her small balcony, the Cambridge skyline twinkling in the background. She drew her knees close, phone nestled in her palm, the crisp air a stark contrast to the gentle warmth she felt whenever she read Mark's name on the screen. Each day, she typed out pieces of her story, how she'd lost her job, her frustrations with rejection letters, and the secret dream she carried in her heart, writing her own children's book. Somehow, confiding these details to a stranger felt more liberating than telling a friend or family member. There was no judgment, just an unspoken understanding. One night, Julie hesitated before sending a longer message that bared more of her soul. She spoke of her mother, Eleanor, a widow in her late 60s who lived across the country. Eleanor was loving but distant, physically and sometimes emotionally, which left Julie feeling alone in her struggles. Mark read her words carefully, sensing the undercurrent of longing that threaded through them. His reply came after a thoughtful pause. I understand that sense of isolation. After Rebecca left, I basically lost any emotional support I thought I had. It's not the same as losing someone to death, but it's a kind of grief all the same. I guess we learn to fill in the gaps however we can. Julie exhaled slowly, comforted by the idea that someone else recognized that hollow ache. She typed, "You're not alone in that, Mark. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions, but I appreciate having you to talk to. It's strange, right? Having a mentor in someone you've never even met in person." He smiled at the phone. A mentor. He'd never been called that outside of his math classroom. The word reminded him of his own mentor at the high school, Professor James Whitaker, a soft-spoken man of 55 who offered wise counsel when Mark felt overwhelmed. Only that morning, James had observed Mark's class, then suggested a new approach to connect with his most challenging student, Jacob. Over lunch, James had also offered more personal advice. "You know," he had said, stirring his coffee, "I've been where you are, balancing family needs, personal heartbreak, and a demanding job. Sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone to find what you're really missing." Back in his bedroom, Mark recalled those words. Maybe these late-night exchanges with Julie were exactly that, stepping beyond his usual boundaries to find connection. He typed another response, his heart beating a bit faster. "I've got a mentor at school, but it feels like we're mentoring each other here, don't you think?" A moment later, Julie's reply lit up his screen. "Yes, that's how it feels. Like we're helping each other figure out life." They continued this conversation into the small hours. Mark shared more about his insecurities as a father. He admitted how terrifying it was to think he might fail Lucas. Julie, fighting a lingering fear of being seen as inadequate, offered her viewpoint, drawing from her years of working with children's books and her own empathy. She encouraged Mark to see beyond his self-doubt. He, in turn, reminded her how talented she was at understanding children's imaginations. By the time they finally said goodnight, the moon was high over Boston, casting pale light into each of their windows. Both felt more centered and, oddly enough, less alone. As Mark rested his phone on the nightstand, a wistful smile played at the corners of his mouth. In a world that often felt distant and cold, he'd discovered a connection that was growing deeper with every midnight confession. Julie tossed and turned that night, her mind whirling with ideas. She kept picturing Lucas, a child she knew only through Mark's heartfelt descriptions. In the texts, Mark constantly praised how bright and curious his son was, how Lucas's eyes lit up whenever they read a new library book together, how he loved sketches of playful animals and magical worlds. Julie remembered her own passion for creating stories and illustrations. A part of her she'd almost let slip away after losing her editing job. When she woke the next morning, an idea pulsed through her mind so strongly that she scribbled it down before even making coffee. A short, handmade children's book for Lucas. It would be a personal gift, something that let her creativity shine and also offered a small token of gratitude to Mark. Her phone buzzed with a new text from him, but she set it aside briefly, determined to harness the spark of inspiration while it was fresh. She spent the next few days meticulously crafting a story about a boy and his father who explored an enchanted park every Saturday. The tale was simple yet heartfelt. A father's quiet bravery and a child's boundless curiosity, woven together with colorful crayon-like illustrations. Julie's modest Cambridge apartment transformed into an impromptu studio. Her coffee table overflowed with colored pencils, watercolors, and sketch paper. In between job applications and interviews, she poured her energy into perfecting each page, layering meaning into the images, a worn bench in the park, a small soccer ball rolling into autumn leaves, subtle nods to the moments Mark had shared in their nightly texts. After 2 weeks of devoted work, the little handmade book was complete. It was bound with sturdy cardstock, tied with a soft ribbon. Julie ran her fingers over the cover, which featured a vibrant illustration of a father and son standing hand in hand under a large oak tree. She titled it "Bridges in the Park," a quiet reference to the idea of connecting separated worlds, much like how she and Mark had connected through a simple texting era. Her next step was trickier. Julie wanted the gift to be a surprise, yet she didn't want to reveal her identity prematurely. She also wrestled with the question, was this too forward? Part of her worried that Mark might feel overwhelmed by such a personal gesture from someone he'd never met in person, but a stronger part of her insisted that maybe Lucas could use a story that reflected the love Mark clearly had for him. Then came the idea to ask Edward Thompson, the friendly owner of the Second Chapter bookstore, for help. They'd met once more since her failed job interview, and he'd taken a liking to her passion for children's literature. Julie visited the store, explained she wanted to leave this handmade book for Mark Smith to pick up. The father of a boy named Lucas. Edward raised an amused eyebrow but agreed. "This is quite a special present," Edward remarked, flipping through the vibrant pages. "You have real talent. If you ever want to talk about showcasing or selling your handmade books, let me know." Julie flushed with both pride and nerves. "Thank you. I'll remember that," she said softly. She left the package with him, carefully labeled with instructions for Mark Smith and his son Lucas, from a friend who believes in happy endings. At home, she typed out a short text to Mark, careful not to reveal too much. "Hey, I left a little something for Lucas at the Second Chapter bookstore. I hope it makes him smile. Please don't think I'm overstepping. It just felt right." Her heart pounded the moment she hit send. The gesture was bold, and she knew it could change the dynamic of their relationship. Yet the look on Mark and Lucas's faces when they discovered the book was worth any risk. Julie couldn't help but hope this simple, heartfelt creation might bridge the gap between text messages and real life, just as she had depicted on every lovingly painted page. Mark was in the middle of sorting through algebra tests in the teacher's lounge when his phone chimed. He saw Julie's text and felt a surge of curiosity, something for Lucas at the bookstore. He'd been swamped lately between lesson plans and Lucas's baseball practices, but the message set his heart racing. If it was from Julie, it had to be special. That afternoon, once he finished at the high school, Mark picked Lucas up from his after-school program. "We're making a stop, kiddo," he announced, ruffling the boy's blonde hair. "Got a surprise at the second chapter bookstore?" Lucas, his bright eyes shining, asked, "Is it a new book, Dad? Or maybe comics?" Mark shrugged but smiled. "I guess we'll see." The bookstore, a cozy place with dark wooden shelves and a worn carpet, greeted them with the faint aroma of coffee and new paper. Edward, the owner, recognized Mark right away from Julie's description, though Mark had never formally met him. "Mr. Smith?" Edward asked politely, stepping out from behind a mahogany counter. "I believe we have a package for you." Curiosity turned into wonder as Edward handed Mark a small, neatly wrapped bundle. Inside was a handmade book with a colorful cover titled "Bridges in the Park." Lucas immediately reached for it. Flipping open the first page, he gasped at a watercolor illustration of a boy and a dad strolling among towering oak trees. The detail was astonishing. The father's kind eyes, the son's grin, even the autumn leaves swirling around them. They found a note tucked inside. "For Lucas, from someone who knows you love a good story." Mark felt a lump in his throat. Without a doubt, this was from Julie. He glanced at Edward, who smiled knowingly but said nothing. That evening, back at home, Mark and Lucas settled on the couch. Lucas insisted on reading the new book aloud. Page after page revealed a whimsical story about a boy who believed the world was full of hidden magic, and a father who loved him enough to see it too. The text was gentle yet powerful, hinting at moments from Mark's own life, Lucas's curiosity, their shared adventures in the park, and Mark's protective nature. Lucas pointed to an image. "Hey, Dad, that kind of looks like us." He giggled, clearly delighted. Mark blinked back unexpected tears. It did look like them. The father in the illustrations had a subtle streak of grey in his hair, and the boy had the same messy blonde locks and freckles. It was more than coincidence. It was a heartfelt portrait of their little family. Once Lucas was asleep, Mark carefully placed the book on the coffee table, his mind buzzing with gratitude. He typed out a text to Julie. "I can't believe you made this. Lucas is in love with it. I'm speechless. Thank you." Moments later, her reply arrived. "I'm so glad he likes it. I was nervous it might be too personal, but your stories about him gave me the inspiration. He's lucky to have a dad like you." Holding the phone, Mark felt his chest tighten with emotion. Ever since Rebecca left, no one had done something so thoughtful for him and Lucas. He replayed the images in his mind, a father and son, exploring a world of wonder, each page a testament to the bond they shared. Julie, someone he still hadn't met in person, had captured their essence with uncanny clarity. He typed back, "This means more than I can say. You have a real gift for storytelling. I'm blown away by how you managed to capture our world." Then, almost impulsively, he added, "I'd really like to thank you in person someday if you're willing. Maybe it's time we finally see each other beyond these screens." After sending it, Mark's heart fluttered with anticipation and a hint of fear. He knew the next steps mattered. Yet for the first time in a long while, he felt a surge of hope that life might finally be guiding him towards something real, something he hadn't realized he'd been missing until now. Julie felt her phone buzz on the coffee table and glanced over with mounting anticipation. She'd been expecting Mark's reaction to the handmade book, hoping her gift wouldn't be too overwhelming, but when she read his message, "Maybe it's time we finally see each other beyond these screens," her heart skipped a beat. Ever since they'd started talking, she'd wrestled with the idea of meeting him in person, worried that reality might not match the safety of virtual connection. Now, sitting in her living room illuminated by soft lamplight, she stared at Mark's words. The sense of relief and excitement she felt told her it was time to push past her fear. Sure, disappointment was possible, but so was something beautiful. Taking a steadying breath, she typed back, "I'm ready if you are. Let's do it." Thus began days of nervous planning. They decided on a weekend meet-up at the Second Chapter bookstore, where Edward often hosted children's storytelling sessions. The plan felt comfortable, casual, in a familiar setting. Yet as soon as they settled on the date, Julie felt a jolt of anxiety. She confided in her close friend Rachel, a 34-year-old pediatrician who had been by Julie's side through many of life's twists and turns. Over lattes at Café Rosewood, Rachel eyed Julie knowingly. "You've been gushing about this Mark for weeks," she teased, stirring her coffee. "I think it's sweet. But I also get you're scared. Just remember, reality can be better than your fears." Julie sighed. "I know. It's just that we've built something so genuine over texts. What if face-to-face it all falls apart? Or what if I'm not what he imagined?" Rachel's tone softened. "Then you'll handle it. But if you don't try, you'll never know. Don't let fear rob you of something special." Meanwhile, Mark faced his own worries. He confided in Sarah, the babysitter, who was not only responsible for Lucas's after-school care, but had become something of a friend. One afternoon, while Lucas played in the backyard, Mark confessed that he was meeting the mysterious Julie. Sarah, with her practical nature, simply patted his shoulder. "You've been telling me about this lady for a while now, Mark. She made that beautiful book for your son. She clearly cares." "I say go for it." Still, as the weekend drew closer, both Mark and Julie battled occasional urges to cancel. Each had moments of self-doubt. Julie about her appearance or whether she was being too forward. Mark about whether he was truly ready to open his heart after the wound his ex-wife left behind. Yet a stronger conviction pulled them forward. The night before they were set to meet, Mark typed a late message. "I'm nervous." Julie responded almost immediately. "Me too." He sent another text, trying to lighten the mood. "If I trip and spill coffee everywhere, please pretend not to notice." She laughed out loud, texting back, "Only if you do the same when I inevitably knock over a display of books." "Deal?" They both smiled at their phones, feeling the sweet tension that comes with taking a leap of faith. Early the next morning, as she dressed, Julie caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She adjusted a simple, soft sweater, brushed her red curls, and took a moment to calm the flutter in her stomach. In a similar fashion, Mark stood in his bedroom, smoothing out his favorite collared shirt and quickly checking his reflection. Lucas peeked in, looking curious. "Dad, are you going on a date?" Mark chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "I'm meeting a friend. We'll see how it goes." Neither wanted to label this meeting too soon. No expectations, no illusions, but quietly, each harbored hope. By the time the sun rose fully, they were both on the brink of a new chapter in their lives. For the first time since their texting adventure began, the day had finally come to step away from screens and let their real selves be seen. And neither Mark nor Julie could quite shake the feeling that something far beyond coincidence was at play. Saturday dawned bright and crisp, the morning sun illuminating the streets of Oak Ridge as Mark drove toward the bookstore. Despite the slight chill, people bustled about in jackets and scarves, giving the area a cozy, energetic vibe. Lucas sat in the back seat, humming to himself and fidgeting with a small toy car. "Dad," he asked, "did you say you're meeting the lady who made that book for me?" "Yes," Mark replied, clearing his throat. "She'll be at the bookstore's story hour. Edward is hosting some activities for kids." "It'll be fun." He tried to sound casual, but a ripple of anxiety hummed beneath every syllable. The second chapter bookstore stood on a corner lot, its display windows festooned with autumn-themed decorations, orange leaves, small pumpkins, and a poster announcing today's children's story session. Inside, the warm scent of cinnamon-laced coffee enveloped them. Lucas darted ahead, enthralled by the colorful posters and shelves brimming with storybooks. Julie had arrived 15 minutes earlier, determined to help Edward arrange the reading area. Plush cushions formed a semicircle around a small wooden chair reserved for the storyteller. She was straightening a stack of children's books when she heard the door's bell chime. Her heart thumped louder than she'd expected. Turning, she glimpsed Mark entering with a young boy, Lucas. Mark paused by the doorway, scanning the room, seeking a woman with curly red hair. Julie's back was partially turned, her focus on adjusting the pillows. She wore a soft forest green sweater that complemented her hair. When she finally spun around, their eyes locked and time seemed to still. At first, neither spoke. It was as though they both recognized each other from some distant memory. A flash of realization crossed Mark's face. He'd seen her before. That day at the park, she was the woman who had been crying on the bench. And for Julie, the recollection of the father who offered her a tissue came rushing back, the air charged with the surprising sense that their paths had crossed long before this arranged meeting. Lucas, sensing something, tugged on Mark's sleeve. "Dad?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. But Mark stepped forward, a gentle smile spreading across his features. "Hi, Julie." He said her name slowly, as if confirming she was real. She nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, I'm Julie." Words faltered for a moment before she continued. Hello, Mark." Then, looking at Lucas, "And you must be Lucas." Lucas blinked, curiosity etched on his face. "You're the lady who made the park book, right?" She nodded, returning his gaze with a warm smile. "I am. Did you like it?" "I loved it," he exclaimed. "How do you know the stuff I like?" Julie chuckled, her eyes drifting to Mark. "Your dad told me a little about you, that's all." Mark and Julie, still in mild shock, found themselves stepping aside, letting Lucas explore the reading area while they hovered near the corner of a bookshelf. "You were the one at Oak Ridge Park that day," Mark said quietly, voice tinged with amazement. "I offered help and you—" He trailed off, remembering she had refused him in her moment of sadness. Julie tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "I had no idea it was you, either. It's surreal." A soft laugh escaped her. "All this time, I've been talking to the very person who showed me kindness that day." The tension finally eased as they shared a brief, understanding grin. In the background, Edward announced the start of story time. Parents and children gathered around. As Lucas joined the circle, Mark and Julie exchanged glances that seemed to say, "We'll talk more soon." But for now, there was a quiet excitement in the air. Mark observed Julie guiding some of the little ones to their cushions, her voice gentle and assured. She appeared perfectly at ease with children, as if she was in her element. He couldn't stop the flutter in his chest, thinking of how improbable it was that they'd actually brushed past each other, only to reconnect so fully now. Though the official plan was simply to meet in person, it felt like the universe had orchestrated something far more significant. Their eyes met again across the small bookstore, and a mutual understanding passed between them. This was bigger than a wrong number. The story hour at second chapter passed in a blur of laughter and vivid illustrations. Julie sat on a low stool, reading from a colorful picture book as a crowd of small, wide-eyed faces leaned closer. Her gentle enthusiasm pulled the children in, Lucas among them, occasionally shooting Mark excited grins. Mark stood at the back, observing Julie in this nurturing role and realizing how natural she seemed. It was one thing to read her texts about children's literature, but another to see her come alive in that setting. When the session ended, Edward offered a polite round of applause. Parents gathered their kids, and soft chatter filled the space. Lucas dashed to the small table at the front to examine the display of new books, leaving Mark and Julie briefly alone. They drifted toward each other, still riding the wave of nerves and relief from their earlier introduction. "You were wonderful up there," Mark said, trying to sound composed. "I can see why you enjoyed working in publishing. Kids connect with you." Julie's cheeks warmed. "It helps that they're so open-minded. I love seeing their faces light up at each new part of a story." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for coming today. I'm really glad we finally met." They stood, shoulders almost touching, as the bookstore gradually emptied. Edward tactfully busied himself in another corner, rearranging novels on a shelf. Mark took a small breath. "I can't believe we crossed paths at that park weeks ago and didn't realize who we were." He recalled seeing her tear-streaked face. "I only wish I'd known. Maybe I could have helped more." Julie shook her head, eyes gleaming with gentle gratitude. "You did help, even if I didn't fully accept it at the time. You reminded me people still care about strangers." She paused, remembering her embarrassment that day. It's kind of poetic in a way that it led to this. From across the room, Lucas called out, "Dad, can we get this book?" He held up a hardcover about space adventures. Mark smiled. "Sure, buddy. Let's ring it up." He glanced at Julie. "Will you be around for a few minutes? Maybe we can grab coffee next door after we're done here?" Julie nodded, a soft warmth in her smile. "I'd love that." Moments later, as Mark and Lucas finished their purchase at the register, Edward shot Julie a knowing grin. He leaned over and whispered, "I'd say that went well." "I've rarely seen two people so relieved, yet so stunned at the same time." Julie laughed under her breath. "It's definitely surreal, but a good surreal." She thanked Edward for letting her read to the kids, promising to come back soon, especially if he needed a guest reader again. He responded by inviting her to plan more children's events, raising a hopeful eyebrow that suggested future opportunities. With Lucas clutching his new spacebook, Mark and Julie stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. "Lucas," Mark asked gently, "what do you think? Maybe we can all grab a hot chocolate or something?" Lucas gave Julie an appraising look, an innocent yet intent gaze that only a child could manage. "That would be fun," he declared, skipping ahead to admire a pile of crunchy leaves on the sidewalk. They made their way to a small cafe a block away, choosing a corner table by a window that overlooked a street lined with maple trees. Over steaming cups of coffee and hot chocolate, the conversation flowed more naturally than either had anticipated. Lucas chimed in with playful questions about the picture book Julie had read, then recapped the best parts of Bridges in the Park. Eventually, he leaned in conspiratorially. "Dad said you were special because you made a book just for me." Julie's eyes flickered with emotion. "Your dad might be the special one too, you know." Lucas giggled, returning his focus to his cocoa, while Mark's heart fluttered at her words. He couldn't help noticing how bright Julie's green eyes were in the afternoon light, and how easily she engaged with Lucas. Moments of that brief encounter at the park returned to him, but now seen through an entirely different lens. As they continued talking, a sense of recognition deeper than mere familiarity settled among them. It was as if each realized, on some instinctual level, that they'd found something worth cherishing. A chance meeting had become a shared secret, and a wrong number had guided them to exactly the right place. When the sun dipped lower in the sky and they finally parted ways, the promise of more to come shimmered between them, like an unspoken agreement that their story was only just beginning. The following weekend arrived with an autumn sun that stretched warmly across Oak Ridge's tree-lined streets. Mark glanced around his living room, noticing the small details he'd neglected. Magazines piled on the coffee table, a collection of Lucas's Legos scattered by the couch. Julie was due to come over for the first time since their meeting, and he felt a flutter of nerves, almost as though he were a teenager anticipating a first date. He spent the morning tidying while Lucas bounced around, chattering about how Miss Julie told such great stories. Mark smiled at his son's excitement, but caught himself wondering if it might be too soon to introduce her to their home. After all, it had taken him months to trust anyone new around Lucas. Still, something felt right about having her here. By early afternoon, the doorbell rang. Lucas rushed to answer, practically catapulting himself at the door. Julie stood there, holding a small bag of homemade cookies and wearing a light jacket over a soft blue sweater. Her cheeks flushed a little. "Hi," she managed, offering the bag to Lucas before stepping inside. A cozy scent of cinnamon drifted through the hallway. "Thought we could have some cookies with hot chocolate," she said, following Mark toward the kitchen. She tried not to stare too obviously at the framed photos on the walls, pictures of Lucas at various stages of childhood, a rare snapshot of Mark with his parents, and a small wedding photo tucked into a corner which she realized must be Rebecca. His ex-wife, Sarah, the babysitter, had taken the day off, so it was just the three of them. The house felt both new to Julie and yet oddly familiar, given how many stories Mark had shared in their late-night texts. While Lucas scampered off to retrieve a board game, Mark and Julie lingered in the kitchen. He poured them each a cup of coffee, quietly admitting he hadn't entertained a guest like this in quite a while. "It's nice," Julie said softly, looking out the window at the modest backyard where a few red leaves drifted from the trees. "Feels cozy here." They settled around the coffee table in the living room, with Lucas insisting on teaching Julie the rules of his favorite board game, which involved colorful tiles and an overly complicated scoring system. Mark watched them, heart full, as Lucas's energetic explanations blended with Julie's gentle laughter. When Lucas got up to grab a different game, Julie took a moment to meet Mark's gaze. "Oh, I'm really glad we're doing this," she said, her tone earnest. "I know it's an adjustment for all of us, but it feels right." Mark nodded. "I've been cautious for so long," he admitted, twisting the watch on his wrist. "After Rebecca left, I guess I forgot what it was like to let someone into our everyday life." Julie reached out and gave his hand a small squeeze. "Same here. I used to be so focused on my job that I missed chances for deeper connections. Then, losing that job threw me into a kind of loneliness I never expected. Meeting you, well, it reminded me I'm more than just a professional title." Before they could say more, Lucas bounded back, arms loaded with another stack of games. "Let's play this one next," he declared, placing the box on the table with a thump. Mark and Julie shared a knowing smile. Time with a child didn't always allow for uninterrupted heart-to-hearts. For the next hour, they played, teased each other over the rules, and devoured Julie's cookies. Slowly, the initial nerves faded. Watching Julie engage so warmly with Lucas made Mark feel like a wall inside him was coming down. She wasn't rushing anything. She was simply present, attentive, and sincere. After they all cleaned up the game pieces, Lucas wandered off to his room, saying he had to find a special drawing to show Julie. That left the two adults briefly alone. Mark leaned in and quietly whispered, "I know we're just taking small steps, but this is the happiest I've felt in a long time." Julie's eyes shone with understanding. "Me too." Their conversation paused as Lucas returned, waving a crayon masterpiece of a stick figure family, one that already included Julie, a bright swirl of color. They both looked at each other, hearts full, aware that these first steps together felt both fragile and promising, as though they were discovering a new path neither had expected to find. A crisp breeze rolled into Oak Ridge the following week, shaking loose the last of the autumn leaves. Mark pulled into his driveway after a draining day at the high school. He'd spent his lunch break dealing with an incident involving Jacob, the disruptive 10th grader who'd been testing his patience for months. On top of that, he found a letter addressed to him in the mailbox, recognizable handwriting that made his stomach lurch. Rebecca's. He stood in the hallway, envelope in hand, waging an internal battle over whether to open it. Memories flashed through his mind. Rebecca packing her bags 2 years ago, her curt goodbye, and the way Lucas cried for days afterward. He exhaled slowly and tore it open. The letter was brief, a mere page. Rebecca wrote that she'd been thinking about Lucas and how she'd like to reconnect in some small way. No mention of regret, but a hint of longing. It ended with a request. Could she possibly visit for a weekend in the coming months to see her son? Mark felt a surge of emotions, anger, frustration, and something resembling guilt. Was it fair to Lucas to deny him a chance to see his mother, or would letting Rebecca back in only reopen old wounds? He laid the letter on the kitchen counter and texted Julie, "Rough day, need to talk if you have time." A short while later, they met at a local diner halfway between Oak Ridge and Cambridge. It was a cozy spot with red vinyl booths and warm overhead lights. The minute Julie saw Mark's strained expression, she knew something was wrong. He slid into the booth across from her and handed her the letter. She read it, her brows knitting in concern. "How do you feel about all this?" she asked gently, passing the paper back. "Conflicted," he admitted, drumming his fingers on the table. "Part of me wants to protect Lucas from more heartbreak. Another part knows he might benefit from seeing his mom again, even if it's brief." Their server approached, and they both ordered coffee. While waiting, Julie touched Mark's hand lightly. "Lucas is 8. Maybe you can talk to him about what he wants." Mark's eyes flickered with uncertainty. He remembers her, but only vaguely. "I'm not sure if he's old enough to handle the idea that she might leave again." Julie understood that wound. Her own father had disappeared from her life early on. She offered a tentative smile. "People can change, Mark. Or maybe they can't. But the only way to find out is to give them a chance." As if the letter weren't enough, Mark confided in her about Jacob's latest classroom disruption. The teenager's father rarely showed up for conferences, and the principal had scheduled another meeting Mark had to attend. Worry gnawed at him. Was he failing as a teacher, too? They sipped coffee, the aroma blending with the tension in the air. Julie listened intently, her green eyes filled with empathy. She recommended a more individualized approach with Jacob, activities that could capture his interest rather than purely punitive measures. Mark found himself nodding, realizing yet again how Julie's empathy extended beyond storytelling. Eventually, their conversation circled back to Rebecca's letter. "What does your gut say?" Julie pressed. He sighed. "My gut says I'm angry, but I don't want anger to control Lucas's future. I might give Rebecca a chance to visit under certain conditions." Julie nodded. She understood how deeply this touched Mark's fears of being hurt again. In a soft voice, she said, "Just remember you're not alone this time. Whatever you decide, I'm here to help you and Lucas through it." That simple reassurance felt like a lifeline. Mark reached for her hand under the table and squeezed it. The diner around them buzzed with mundane chatter, but in that moment, they both recognized that the past had a way of resurfacing. They also realized that facing these ghosts together might be the next crucial step in strengthening what they were building, a bond that needed honesty and courage to withstand whatever came next. 2 nights later, Mark found himself alone in his car outside Julie's apartment building, the sky around him dark and peppered with distant stars. He'd come unannounced, feeling overwhelmed by the swirl of emotions that Rebecca's letter had triggered. His mind flickered with doubts about whether he should be here at this hour, but he texted Julie from the driver's seat. "Downstairs, need to talk if you're okay with that." In minutes, she appeared at the building's entrance, wearing a light jacket and a concerned expression. Without a word, she slipped into the passenger seat. Mark stared at the steering wheel, wrestling with how to explain. "Thank you for letting me come," he finally said. I've been going in circles, thinking about Rebecca and Lucas, thinking about how to handle this visit if it happens. I know it's late. I'm sorry." Julie reached for his hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. "You don't have to apologize. You're allowed to feel confused," he exhaled, describing how he'd relived old memories all week, Rebecca's departure, Lucas's tears. "I realize I haven't fully dealt with my own resentment," he admitted. "What if she hurts him again?" Julie's voice remained steady. "You can set boundaries, maybe arrange a short visit in a neutral place. Explain things carefully to Lucas. You can't protect him from every possible pain, but you can guide him." They sat in silence for a few moments, the hum of distant traffic providing a background lullaby. Finally, Mark shifted in his seat, turning to face her. "I've been thinking about us too, about how I reacted when I first found out she wanted to come back. I kind of shut down. I don't want that to spill into what we have." Julie looked at him, her expression softening. "We're both carrying heavy stories. I have my fears too, but if we talk about them, maybe we can cross these bridges instead of burning them." The tension in his chest loosened. "You're right. It's just all so new, trying to trust again while also dealing with old baggage." She placed her other hand gently on his shoulder. "We'll get through this step by step." They talked more, deep into the night, about the possibility of introducing Julie and Rebecca, about how Lucas might react. Mark also confessed his struggles at work, how Jacob's situation weighed on him. Julie offered both practical tips and emotional support, reminding him that not every child who acts out is beyond help. Eventually, the chill in the car grew noticeable. Julie shivered, and Mark started the engine, flipping on the heat. He glanced at her apartment building. "Do you want to go inside?" he asked softly. Julie hesitated, then shook her head. "Let's stay here. I like the quiet. My apartment feels crowded with my own worries tonight." So they remained in the car, heater humming and headlights occasionally sweeping across the interior as other vehicles passed by. In that small, enclosed space, they formed a pocket of trust and warmth. At one point, Julie leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering that sometimes being vulnerable was the hardest but most necessary choice. Mark nodded, his eyes flickering to the ring indentation left on his finger from a marriage that dissolved 2 years prior. "I'm trying to be brave," he murmured, "but I keep wondering if I'm strong enough for all of this. My job, my son, my ex-wife's return, you." Julie's answer was simple. "Strength isn't about not breaking. It's about letting people help you piece things back together." Her words lingered in the air, offering a tender kind of solace. For the first time in a while, Mark realized he didn't have to figure everything out alone. They stayed there in the car until the stars above faded into the hush of pre-dawn light, each silently aware that the crossing they faced would be difficult, but maybe, together, they had what it took to reach the other side. In the days following their late-night car conversation, life found a new rhythm. Mark continued juggling his roles as father and teacher, while Julie settled into a freelance gig. She'd landed editing manuscripts for a small publisher in New Hampshire. It was remote work, allowing her to remain in Cambridge. Though it was not the full-time position she once hoped for, it brought a sense of stability and a new challenge of balancing her schedule with time spent in Oakridge. Lucas seemed to thrive under these changes, especially when Julie visited. He'd race to show her his latest drawings or discuss the newest chapter of a space travel book he'd discovered. Mark watched their growing bond with a mix of relief and protectiveness. Each day, he fought a flicker of worry about Lucas growing too attached, especially with the looming possibility of Rebecca's visit. One chilly Saturday, Eleanor Walker, Julie's 68-year-old mother, flew in from the West Coast for a short stay. Julie had told Mark stories about her mother, widowed and affectionate, yet often physically distant due to living so far away. Eleanor's health had been a concern lately, though she tended to keep her worries private. Julie invited Mark and Lucas to meet Eleanor at a small, family-run restaurant near Cambridge. Bright midday sunshine filtered through the windows as they all sat down at a round table, exchanging polite introductions. Eleanor was a petite woman with greying hair neatly pinned back, her gaze sharp and curious. After the initial pleasantries, she focused on Mark. "So, you're the reason my daughter won't stop smiling at her phone," Eleanor teased gently. Julie blushed, but a warm chuckle spread around the table. Lucas, perched between Mark and Julie, explained to Eleanor in that matter-of-fact tone only children possess, "She wrote me a special book, you know." Eleanor's expression softened. "I heard. Sounds like you've got a real talent, dear." She reached over and patted Julie's hand. "You always did have a gift for creativity, ever since you wrote that silly story about talking frogs in elementary school." They ordered lunch, diving into casual conversation about the local area and how chilly Boston could get this time of year. Inevitably, talk turned to future plans. Mark mentioned the letter from Rebecca, omitting the more painful details for Lucas's sake. Eleanor gave him a thoughtful look. "Families can be complicated. Just be careful with your heart and your sons, but don't let fear stop you from trying to make peace." Julie shot her mother a grateful glance. She knew firsthand how regret could linger when meaningful connections slipped away. Meanwhile, Lucas piped up that he was happy Miss Julie was around because she made the house less lonely. Mark caught Julie's eye, and a subtle current of affection passed between them. After lunch, they walked to a nearby park. Eleanor, feeling the chill, sat on a bench while Julie, Mark, and Lucas ambled through a cluster of trees. Julie confided in Mark about her mother's health concerns, some talk of needing a caregiver or moving closer. "She won't admit it, but I can tell she's slowing down. If things get worse, I might have to rearrange my life to help her." Mark listened, taking in the weight behind her words. "Family obligations can be tough," he said gently. "But if it comes to that, we'll figure something out." Julie felt an odd mixture of gratitude and anxiety. She realized their relationship now had multiple moving parts: her mother's well-being, Mark's custody complexities, and both of their jobs. It was a delicate balance, like a tightrope walk, where one misstep could unsettle everything. Yet there was comfort in knowing they wanted to navigate these challenges together. As they returned to the bench, Eleanor eyed them with a discerning gaze. She didn't say anything, but Julie could sense her mother's approval. Lucas was chattering about some new game he wanted them to try. Mark, his hand brushing lightly against Julie's, promised they'd arrange a time for it. In that moment, with autumn leaves crunching underfoot and sunlight catching in Eleanor's hair, it felt like a glimpse of what life might look like if they all learned to balance their needs, responsibilities, and hopes. No grand declarations, just small steps forward, a tender, tentative harmony that made the future seem a little less daunting. 2 weeks later, the late autumn chill turned sharper, hinting that winter was on the horizon. Mark sat at his school desk long after the final bell had rung. He was reviewing the lesson plan for the following day when an unexpected email arrived. An invitation to present at a regional education conference. It was a chance to showcase his innovative approach for engaging challenging students like Jacob. He felt a flicker of excitement, but also recognized it meant additional hours of preparation and potential out-of-town travel. Meanwhile, Julie faced her own pivotal moment. Catherine Wells, an influential editor she'd met at a networking event, had contacted her about a temporary position in Springfield. It involved consulting on a children's book series, a role that could bolster Julie's career significantly, but it also meant commuting 2 hours each way, or even relocating for a few months if it went well. That evening, Mark arrived home to find Lucas quietly coloring in the living room. The boy looked up. "Dad, can you help me with my reading homework soon?" Mark nodded, ruffling Lucas's hair before stepping into the kitchen where he saw Julie's name light up his phone screen. He answered quickly, detecting a hint of tension in her tone. "I've got a big decision to make," she told him, explaining the Springfield opportunity. "It might mean being away more often, but it's a huge break for me. Something that could turn into a more permanent editorial role." Mark felt conflicting emotions stir. On one hand, he genuinely wanted Julie to succeed and chase her dreams. On the other, the thought of her being further away unsettled him. He confessed the same. "I'm proud of you, but I worry what that means for us. I don't want to hold you back." They agreed to talk it through in person, so Julie drove to Oak Ridge later that night. Sarah had taken Lucas out for a short walk, giving Mark and Julie time to talk in the stillness of the living room. The lamp cast a warm glow as they sat facing each other on the couch, tension thick in the air. "I love being here with you and Lucas," Julie said, clasping her hands, "but I also need to regain my footing professionally. My mother's health is another wild card, and if this role in Springfield becomes permanent, I might have to make some big changes." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I get it. I also just got invited to present at a conference. A chance to expand my role in the district. That's exciting, but it's added pressure. My schedule's already tight with Lucas, and if Rebecca does visit soon..." He trailed off, mind spinning. They inched closer on the couch, shoulders nearly touching. Gently, Mark placed a hand over hers. "I don't want you to lose this opportunity. At the same time, we have to be realistic about what distance might mean for us." Julie blinked back the sting of tears. "Maybe we can work out a balance. I could commute part-time, stay in Springfield a couple days a week if needed, and come back here in between. This way, I'm not completely gone." Mark exhaled, relief mingling with uncertainty. "That could be possible. We could make a schedule. Maybe I can arrange certain days off if I have to travel for the conference." Their conversation grew detailed, almost businesslike, as they drafted hypothetical scenarios, mapping out weekends, factoring in Lucas's routines, and considering both of their new opportunities. The tension didn't vanish, but with every word, they formed a plan that allowed each to pursue growth without sacrificing the fragile connection they'd built. When Sarah and Lucas returned, the discussion tapered. Yet there was a sense that they'd taken a crucial step. They were at a crossroads, acknowledging that life never stopped moving. Both had big decisions. Mark with his professional duties and the looming possibility of Rebecca's visit. Julie with a career-defining project and her mother's health in the background. In the gentle hush of the evening, they shared a lingering look that held both fear and excitement. They couldn't predict all outcomes, but they could choose to face them together, determined not to let distance, old wounds, or external pressures undo what they'd painstakingly created. And for the moment, that promise was enough to keep hope alive, even as winter's chill pressed closer each day. The night before Mark's big education conference, the wind rattled the windows of his Oak Ridge home like an omen. Inside, a hush fell over the living room. Lucas had gone to bed an hour ago, leaving Mark and Julie alone in a quiet made heavier by the conversation they were both avoiding. Mark placed his notes for the conference presentation on the coffee table and turned to face her. The soft lamplight revealed the strain in his dark eyes. "I know this might sound sudden," he began, voice low, "but what if you stayed here with us, temporarily or longer?" He trailed off, glancing around as if seeing his modest home through her eyes. The idea had been on his mind for weeks. Her lease in Cambridge was month to month, and he hated the notion of her commuting back and forth if she took the Springfield job. More than that, he wanted her closer, a part of his everyday life. Julie's heart skipped. She'd sensed something like this coming ever since their late-night confessions in the car. Still, hearing the words made everything startlingly real. Her fingers twisted in her lap. "Mark, She paused, searching his expression. "I'm honored you'd ask me to live here, but I need to be honest. I accepted the temporary position in Springfield." His face flickered with surprise. She hurried on, fearing she might lose her nerve. "It's a big deal for me professionally. Catherine Wells is expecting me to start soon. It might lead to something permanent, or it might not. But I can't walk away from it now. And if I'm traveling more, I don't want to uproot my life here in Boston, only to be gone half the time." Mark's shoulders sank, and he looked away, biting down on a surge of disappointment. "I understand," he said at last, but his voice trembled. I guess I was hoping we could build something without having to juggle so many separate pieces." He took a breath, placing one hand over hers. "But I don't want to stand in your way." She squeezed his hand in return, sorrow mingling with resolve. "I want to build a future with you, Mark. That hasn't changed, but I'm not ready to give up this opportunity. If it turns out I can work remotely most days, maybe I can still be here often. Let's see how it evolves." His eyes clouded with conflict. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I shouldn't have sprung that on you right before my trip." He stood, gathering his conference papers, his jaw tight. Even though he knew Julie wasn't rejecting him, he couldn't help the sting of feeling as if the timing never worked in their favor. She followed him to the small hallway near Lucas's bedroom door, her soft sweater brushing against his arm. "We'll figure out a way," she said, her voice hushed so as not to wake the boy. "I don't want us to be stuck in this place of half-commitment, but I also can't ignore my career, not after everything I lost." Mark turned to her, frustration flickering in his eyes. "I get it, I do, just promise me we'll talk more when I get back from the conference." His tone carried a hint of desperation. "I don't want this to be the start of us drifting apart." "I promise," she whispered, leaning in for a brief hug that felt both reassuring and incomplete. He clung to her for a moment, inhaling the faint scent of her shampoo, wishing he could freeze time. Later that night, as Julie left for her apartment, Mark stood at the window watching her car lights fade into the darkness. His chest felt tight with words left unspoken, the depth of his fear that life was slipping into the same pattern that once led to heartbreak. He tried to shake off the worry, reminding himself that this was different, that Julie was different. Still, the tension of unshared dreams and uncertain futures lingered in the silence, hovering like a veil over the house long after she was gone. By the time Mark's plane touched down in Chicago for the education conference, Julie was already in Springfield, settling into a small rented apartment she found near Catherine Wells's publishing office. The physical distance between them felt abruptly real. Though they texted each night, their messages carried a new weight, tinted by the question of whether these separate paths would eventually merge again. Mark spent his conference days meeting fellow educators and presenting ideas on engaging reluctant learners, ideas partly shaped by midnight talks he'd had with Julie. Whenever colleagues asked about his personal life, he'd pause, uncertain how to summarize the tangle of hope, love, and conflict he felt. He was proud to showcase his project on stage, but each time he exited a panel, he caught himself checking his phone, half hoping for a supportive text from her. Meanwhile, in Springfield, Julie worked tirelessly in a bustling office with floor-to-ceiling shelves of manuscripts. Catherine was a formidable but fair editor, assigning Julie to spearhead a children's series that addressed emotional growth in early readers. Ironically, the themes reminded Julie of her own struggles to balance personal emotions with professional drive. She'd look out the window at the traffic-choked streets, missing the quieter corners of Boston, missing Mark and Lucas. On the second night, Mark FaceTimed her from his Chicago hotel room. The stiff-looking decor formed a stark contrast to his warm gaze. Julie sat cross-legged on her inflatable mattress, her temporary furniture, until she decided if she'd stay in Springfield long-term. "So," she asked gently, "how's the conference?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's going well, but it's not the same without you around to talk it through. I got an offer to expand my pilot program into a regional collaboration. That means more workload, maybe more travel." He hesitated, studying her face on the small screen. "How about you? How's day 2? She offered a tentative smile. "It's intense, but exciting. Catherine seems to trust me with these books, and I'm drafting a framework that might become a cornerstone for the entire line. It's the most responsibility I've ever had." Despite her fatigue, her green eyes gleamed with passion. "I wish you were here to celebrate with me." Silence lingered, the distance raw and palpable. "We'll celebrate when I'm back," Mark said softly. "Julie, do you think we rushed that conversation about you moving in, or about me wanting that so soon?" She bit her lip. "Maybe we did, but that doesn't mean the feeling behind it wasn't real." A wave of vulnerability passed over her. "I hate not being there. Even if this job is a step forward, it leaves me uneasy about the future of us." Mark nodded. "Yeah. I keep reminding myself that we've tackled plenty of hurdles already. Rebecca's letter, Lucas's uncertainties, your mother's health. This is just one more." He tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "I'm learning that love doesn't mean no challenges. It means facing them anyway." They chatted a bit longer about mundane details, her cramped new kitchen, his hectic conference schedule, Lucas's text messages about how bored he was without her reading bedtime stories. Then Julie mentioned a conversation she'd had with Eleanor, who encouraged her daughter not to sacrifice a meaningful relationship for a job, but also said it was possible to blend dreams if both partners truly wanted it. After they ended the call, both of them felt that familiar ache. Yet there was a clarity, too, an understanding that while they were apart physically, they still cared enough to navigate the distance. Mark gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline, the city lights twinkling like an unspoken promise that he and Julie were still writing their story, even if on separate pages for the moment. Back in Springfield, Julie lay down on her makeshift bed, rereading the text Mark had sent earlier that day. The sense of longing mixed with an undercurrent of hope. Distance might pose a trial, but it was also forcing them to reflect on what truly mattered. And for now, that quiet certainty would have to be enough. 3 days after the conference wrapped up, Mark found himself back in Oakridge, the chill of early winter settling in the air. He paused on his front porch, luggage in hand, letting the relief of being home wash over him. Almost instantly, Lucas barreled through the door, latching onto Mark in a tight hug. "Dad, you're back!" The boy's blue eyes sparkled with excitement. "I missed you." Mark ruffled his son's hair, grateful for the familiar warmth. Inside, the living room felt cozy but empty. He realized how much he'd grown accustomed to Julie's presence, her laughter, her insight, her gentle teasing. Ever since she left for Springfield, the house felt like it was missing a key piece. Later that evening, just as Mark finished making spaghetti for Lucas, a knock sounded at the door. His heart gave a little jolt, half hoping it was Julie. Instead, he opened it to find her face lit by the porch light, lips curved in a small, tentative smile. She had driven back to Boston unannounced. The next moment, Mark ushered her inside, relief flooding him. "I needed to see you," Julie said quietly, shrugging out of her coat. The swirl of cold air followed, along with the faint scent of winter on her hair. "We have a lot to talk about." They settled at the kitchen table, Lucas bounding around them, asking Julie about Springfield. She fielded his questions with patient humor. Yes, she was working on some really cool books, and yes, she'd brought him a new story to read tonight. After a few minutes, Lucas vanished to retrieve something from his room, leaving the two adults alone in the warm glow of the overhead light. "So," Mark began, leaning forward, "tell me what's on your mind." Julie exhaled, clasping her hands. "Springfield's project is demanding, but Catherine's hinted it could become permanent. She wants a dedicated editorial manager. That means me, if I want it, which would mean relocating." She glanced at him, uncertainty etched on her features. "But I'm not sure I can do that. I don't want to uproot everything, especially now." Mark felt a pang in his chest. Part of him wanted to say, "Don't go. Stay with me." But he swallowed back the words, knowing how important her career was. Instead, he offered, "Could you split your time between Springfield and here indefinitely? Or talk to Catherine about a hybrid role?" Julie gave a small shrug. "That's what I'm planning to propose, but I don't know if she'll agree. And if she doesn't, I'm torn." Her voice grew thick with emotion. "I want to be here with you and Lucas. I want to keep building what we have, yet I also need to stand on my own 2 feet again after everything that happened with my last job." Mark reached out to cover her hands with his. "I understand," he said, meaning it. "I do. I've been offered a broader role with my math program. It might even lead to a bigger position in the district." He hesitated, biting his lip. "I guess we both have these crossroads, and it's terrifying trying to figure out how to move forward together." Soft footsteps interrupted them as Lucas returned, holding a new drawing. A rocket ship blasting off from Earth toward a glittering star. He handed it to Julie. "I made this for you, so you don't forget us when you're at your new job." She blinked, touched by the gesture. The rocket's nose cone had a stick figure labeled Julie, and a little figure labeled Dad, plus a smaller one labeled Lucas. They were all smiling inside the cockpit. Overcome, she pulled Lucas into a gentle hug. Mark watched this exchange, heart in his throat. This was what he wanted, a family, even if not traditional. He caught Julie's eye. There was fear there, but also resolve. They might not have all the answers yet, but they were willing to try. Just then, the phone rang, shattering the moment. Mark picked it up to hear Rebecca's voice on the other end, announcing she would visit soon. As Mark hung up, he and Julie exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The crossroads had just grown more complex, with another life stepping back into their world. Still, in that moment, neither doubted their commitment to at least try to face whatever came next, together, if fate allowed. Within a week, An unexpected snowstorm barreled through Massachusetts, blanketing Oak Ridge in a flurry of white and ice. The wind howled outside Mark's house, bending tree branches under its force. By late afternoon, local advisories warned residents to stay off the roads. Julie, who had come by earlier to discuss schedules, found herself stuck when the storm escalated far beyond the forecast. "What do we do?" she asked, peering out the window at the swirling drifts. Cars were barely visible. Sarah, the babysitter, had already braved the slick roads to get home, and the power lines flickered ominously. Mark crossed his arms, glancing toward the fireplace. "We hunker down," he replied. "We've got groceries, and I can start a fire. I don't think anyone's going anywhere tonight." Lucas, thrilled by the sudden adventure, ran around collecting blankets and flashlights. "This is like camping," he exclaimed, setting them in the living room. Julie grabbed candles from a drawer, and Mark hauled in extra firewood. Soon, flames crackled and danced in the fireplace, providing a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the fierce white storm beyond the windows. Darkness fell early, and so did the power. The overhead lights blinked out, leaving them reliant on candles and the flicker of the fire. Lucas giggled, shining a flashlight under his chin to make silly faces. Mark tried to text the electric company for updates, but the cellular signal wavered. Eventually, he surrendered, placing his phone aside. They gathered in the living room, pulling the couch and chairs closer to the fire. Lucas declared it a family fort, setting up a small game of checkers on the coffee table. Julie felt a wave of domestic warmth wash over her. Despite the cold outside, here they were, united in cozy chaos. She helped Lucas set up the pieces, while Mark rummaged for extra quilts. As the hours passed, the sense of improvisation turned into an impromptu, bonding experience. Julie retrieved a notepad and suggested they pass the time by telling stories. Mark, a bit hesitant at first, ended up contributing a whimsical tale about a math teacher who taught dragons how to count treasure. Lucas, eyes shining, added ridiculous plot twists, and Julie illustrated them with quick pencil sketches, the shadows of candlelight dancing across her pages. During a break in the fun, Mark noticed Lucas's cheeks were a bit flushed. He laid a hand on his forehead and felt a mild fever. Worry tightened in his chest. "Hey, buddy, you feeling okay?" Lucas shrugged, looking tired. "My chest feels kinda tight, Dad." Aware of Lucas's occasional asthma flare-ups, Mark retrieved the inhaler from the kitchen. Julie calmly helped Lucas sit upright, encouraging him to take slow, measured breaths. "We're going to be okay," she said softly, her voice steady. Between Mark's concern and the flickering shadows, the moment felt tense, but Julie's presence anchored them. Once Lucas's breathing steadied, Mark closed his eyes in relief. The storm still raged, but in that small, candlelit living room, there was a renewed sense of gratitude for each other. Julie tucked a blanket snugly around Lucas, who was already nodding off on the sofa. As the night deepened, the three of them huddled close to the fire. Every so often, the wind rattled the windows, but the house held firm. Softly, Mark asked, "Do you think this is what it would feel like? You know, being a family full-time." The chaotic moments, the unexpected challenges, but also the comfort. Julie's gaze flickered to Lucas, soundly asleep, then back to Mark. "I think it might be," she replied, voice nearly a whisper. "And I like it." A gentle smile spread across Mark's face. Outside, the storm showed no sign of letting up, yet in that circle of lamplight and shared blankets, a fragile yet powerful truth emerged. Even in the harshest conditions, they could create warmth together. The future remained uncertain, Rebecca's approaching visit, the Springfield job, the unspoken tensions. But for one snowbound night, this makeshift family discovered they had what it took to weather a storm as one. When dawn broke the next morning, the storm's fury had eased, leaving a hushed blanket of white across Oak Ridge. Sunlight gleamed on the untouched snowdrifts outside Mark's windows. Power was still out, but the fireplace embers glowed faintly, and the inside of the house felt snug. Lucas, feeling better but still a bit congested, woke up excited to see the transformed winter wonderland. "Can we go outside, Dad?" he asked, eyes shining with a child's wonder. Mark ruffled his hair. "Soon. Let's make sure the roads are safe first, okay?" He glanced over at Julie, who was just stirring from the couch, yawning and stretching. Their make-do sleeping arrangements had turned the living room into a sleepover zone. They shared a smile that spoke of relief. Relief at Lucas's improved condition, and relief that the worst of the storm had passed. Outside, the world looked brighter, as if cleansed by the snowfall. After a breakfast of cereal and whatever they could salvage from the fridge, they heard a knock at the door. It was Edward, the bookstore owner, trudging up the driveway in heavy boots, his breath puffing in the cold air. "Just checking on folks," he explained. "Anyone needs supplies?" Mark shook his head, thanking him. The gesture made the morning feel festive, as neighbors stepped out to help one another in the storm's aftermath. Eventually, the power blinked back on, followed by the welcome hum of the furnace. Mark and Julie took turns cleaning up the melted snow puddles from boots and blankets. The day felt unexpectedly celebratory, like a holiday they hadn't planned. Lucas snuggled by the rekindled fire, reading one of the library books Julie had brought him. With the roads clearing, a rumble in the driveway announced a delivery truck. The driver hopped out, carefully navigating the slushy ground, and handed Mark a small package, grinning through a knitted scarf. "Late delivery?" he joked. "Storm threw off everything." Puzzled, Mark brought the package indoors. It was addressed to Julie, care of Mark's address. Her cheeks turned pink as she read the label. "Oh, I forgot about this." She opened the box to reveal a set of custom-bound copies of Bridges in the Park, the story she'd initially created for Lucas, now professionally printed in a limited run. She pulled out one copy, its vibrant cover shining in the morning light. Lucas gasped. "That's our story. It's real." He flipped through the pages, eyes wide at seeing something so personal turned into a professional-looking book. Julie's own eyes glistened. "Catherine arranged a small print run," she explained softly. "She wanted to see if my personal story could be used as a prototype for a children's line about fathers and sons." Mark cradled one copy in his hands, speechless. The pages were exactly as Julie had drawn them, but refined, sturdier binding, smooth paper, fresh ink. The dedication page read, "For Lucas, whose imagination lit this path, and for Mark, who showed me that sometimes the wrong number is exactly right." He swallowed hard, fighting back emotion. "You never cease to amaze me," he whispered. It's beautiful." Julie's cheeks warmed. "It's just a small batch, but Catherine's interested in exploring it further, maybe distributing it in a pilot program." She hesitated. "I know my future in Springfield is still uncertain, but this feels like a good sign. And no matter what happens, these books belong to us, to this story we've shared." Lucas bounced on his toes, hugging his own copy. "Can we read it together tonight, like old times?" He looked at them with such earnestness that Mark and Julie exchanged a tender glance. "Absolutely," Mark said, voice thick with pride. "Tonight, by the fire." As midday arrived, they placed the new copies on a shelf in the living room where everyone could see them. The snow outside sparkled in the sunlight, and the house hummed with a quiet joy. It felt like a small gift from fate, this unexpected moment of unity. Though challenges still hovered, Rebecca's upcoming visit, Julie's job decisions, Mark's potential career shift, here was tangible proof that some stories, once shared, had the power to bind people together in ways they never imagined. As they settled down for lunch, The hush of fresh snow outside contrasted with the warmth within. And in that stillness, Mark and Julie found reassurance that even in a season of upheaval, unexpected gifts could arrive at just the right time, reminding them why they believed in this fragile, hopeful future in the first place. A soft hush lay over Oak Ridge in the weeks following the snowstorm, as if the world had paused to catch its breath. Winter stretched its icy fingers across the neighborhood, forming delicate frosts on windows each morning. Yet within Mark's home, change pulsed steadily, some of it exhilarating, some of it daunting. Julie had stayed more often than not, splitting her time between Springfield and Oak Ridge. A makeshift workspace in Mark's spare room held her laptop and an ever-growing stack of children's manuscripts. She found herself adjusting to the hum of this new life, sharing breakfasts with Lucas, collaborating on a story before driving to Springfield for editorial meetings, then returning for family dinners if she could. It was far from perfect, but it kept her tethered to the people she was growing to love. One wintry afternoon, Mark walked into the living room and spotted Julie adjusting a set of file folders on the small desk they'd set up. He smiled softly at the sight, remembering how empty that room used to feel. "Heading out soon?" he asked, noticing the car keys on the table. She nodded. "I have a quick meeting with Catherine about expanding Bridges in the Park into a digital format, but I'll be back by dinner time, hopefully. I want to be here to help Lucas with his reading project." Just then, Lucas dashed in from the hallway, brandishing a piece of paper. "Dad, I got an A on my space essay," he announced, practically glowing. Catching sight of Julie, he beamed. "Thank you for checking my spelling, Miss Julie." Mark ruffled Lucas's hair, pride coursing through him. "Looks like you had a great teacher or two, bud," Julie laughed, praising Lucas before heading toward the door. On the threshold, she paused. "I might be late if traffic's bad." "If so, go ahead and eat, okay?" A shadow of concern flickered across Mark's face. He understood her schedule, but every part of him wanted her to slow down, to stay. Julie noticed his hesitation and offered a reassuring smile. "I'll do my best to be back in time," she promised, then disappeared into the cold afternoon. Left alone, Mark felt both gratitude and unease. Gratitude that Julie was weaving herself into their daily rhythms. Unease because everything felt temporary. Her job in Springfield, the swirl of responsibilities, it loomed over them, forcing questions about how long they could sustain this back-and-forth existence. That evening, a sense of anticipation laced the air. Lucas was excited to share his reading project, and Mark busied himself cooking pasta. But as the hours ticked by, darkness fell, and the plate of food he set aside for Julie sat untouched. By 8 o'clock, still no sign of her. Mark's phone buzzed, a text from Julie. "Running late, car trouble. I'm okay, but it might be a while." Concern twisted in Mark's chest. He texted back immediately, "Where are you? Do you need me to come get you?" It took several long minutes before another message arrived, explaining she was waiting for roadside assistance just off the highway near Springfield. Restless, Mark paced the living room. Lucas had already gone to bed. Disappointed he couldn't show Julie his project. The clock crept past 9, then 10. Finally, headlights flared across the driveway. Mark rushed to the door to find Julie stepping out of a borrowed tow truck, snow clinging to her boots. Her cheeks were flushed with cold as she entered, apologizing profusely. Mark enveloped her in a hug, tension flooding away as he felt her shiver in his arms. "You're safe, that's what matters," he murmured, concern overriding his earlier frustration. Julie tried to muster a weary smile. "I feel so scatterbrained. One foot in Springfield, one foot here. I'm afraid I'm failing on both ends." Gently guiding her to the couch, Mark helped remove her snow-dusted jacket. "You're not failing," he said softly. "We're just figuring this out. But we need a plan." She nodded. eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Deep down, they both knew their current patchwork approach couldn't last forever. As winter pressed on, this new beginning demanded a decision, whether to fuse their lives for real or risk watching their fragile sense of home slip through frosty fingers. The question hovered, unspoken, as they clung to each other in the quiet house, the future feeling both closer and more uncertain than ever. Weeks blended into months, and slowly, the world shifted from the stark whites of winter to the earliest hints of spring. Patches of grass emerged from melting snow, and tiny buds began to show on the barren branches around Oak Ridge. With the changing season came new challenges and new clarity. One brisk morning, Julie stood in Mark's front yard, sipping a cup of coffee. She listened to birds chirping overhead, trying to absorb the peace before her day began. Inside, Mark was wrangling Lucas into a clean shirt for school. Beyond the front gate, a taxi pulled up unexpectedly. Rebecca stepped out, shoulders hunched against the lingering chill, a small suitcase in hand. Her dark hair framed a face that seemed thinner than the pictures Mark had once kept. Julie's breath caught. They'd all known this visit was coming. But now that the moment arrived, she felt her pulse hammer. Mark appeared in the doorway, Lucas by his side. The boy's eyes widened. "Mom?" he asked, his voice quivering. Rebecca offered a tentative smile. "Hi, Lucas." "It's been a while." Inside, an awkward reunion took shape. Rebecca's presence filled the living room with an unease neither Mark nor Julie could quite dispel. Lucas hovered, uncertain if he should run to her or keep his distance. Eventually, Mark guided their son to the couch. "It's okay," he said gently. "Let's all just talk." Julie slipped into the background, feeling her role blur. This was a conversation between a mother and son, and Mark was the bridge between them. She caught Rebecca's gaze briefly, a complicated mixture of regret and guarded hope. The initial moments were tense. Rebecca, visibly nervous, handed Lucas a small wrapped package, a new book about marine animals, which he unwrapped slowly. "I remembered you liked these," she offered, voice trembling. Lucas studied the glossy cover. "Thanks," he mumbled. "I do like turtles." He didn't look up, and Julie's heart constricted at the uncertainty in his eyes. As the day wore on, Mark took Rebecca and Lucas for a walk through Oak Ridge Park. Julie stayed behind, sensing they needed space to reconnect. She busied herself tidying the kitchen, but her thoughts whirled. She hoped Rebecca had changed enough to respect Lucas's emotional boundaries. She also worried how Mark would handle the swirl of old memories. By the time they returned, Lucas appeared more at ease, chatty about the ducks he'd fed at the pond. Rebecca seemed relieved, exchanging timid smiles with Mark. Even so, the weight of years lost lingered. After dinner, Julie caught a moment alone with Rebecca when they both reached for the same glass in the kitchen. Their eyes met, and for a long beat, neither spoke. Then Rebecca cleared her throat. "I'm grateful to you, you know," she said softly. "Lucas seems so stable, happy, and I can tell you've been part of that." Julie set the glass down carefully. "I care a lot about him," she admitted, her voice steady but gentle. "I want what's best for Lucas, and for Mark, too." Rebecca sighed, glancing toward the living room where Lucas and Mark were laughing over some silly TV show. "I messed up, leaving the way I did. Part of me wants to earn his trust back, but I see now I can't just waltz in and expect it all to be normal." Julie nodded, empathy and protectiveness tangling. "It'll take time, but kids can be amazingly forgiving if they feel safe." She paused, summoning courage. "Just be consistent. That's the best thing you can do." Rebecca's eyes shimmered with gratitude, and maybe relief that Julie wasn't shutting her out. As awkward as it felt, it was a step toward healing. The next day, Rebecca departed, promising more frequent calls and a potential summer visit. Lucas gave her a hesitant hug, and Mark walked her to the curb. When he returned, his shoulders sagged from the emotional toll, but a note of determination laced his voice as he told Julie, maybe this time she'll keep her word. Julie squeezed his hand, hoping for Lucas's sake that was true. Outside, the first crocus buds peeked through the thawed earth. A gentle breeze carried the promise of renewal, reflecting the transformations that spring might bring to all their lives. Yet neither Mark nor Julie could predict how fully those transformations would reshape their family and their future together. The brisk days of spring gradually gave way to warmer breezes and fresh blossoms. Oak Park came alive with the laughter of children running among new flowers. It was in that very park, one afternoon, that Rebecca's presence wove another thread into Lucas's life. She had followed through on her promise of occasional weekend visits, each short and carefully supervised. At first, every meeting was tense, but over time, Lucas and Rebecca began to settle into an uneasy kind of familiarity. Mark insisted on transparency, ensuring that any plan involving Rebecca went through him. He still harbored understandable reservations. Yet he found that letting Lucas see his mother in small doses was better than the endless questions about her absence. Meanwhile, Julie navigated her final weeks in Springfield with mounting questions. Catherine pushed for a permanent role, complete with a relocation package. Julie recognized the significance of such an offer. Editorial positions like this didn't appear every day. Yet each time she imagined leaving Oak Ridge for good, the thought weighed heavily. One mild afternoon, she and Mark sat on a bench at Oak Ridge Park, near the spot where they had first crossed paths without recognizing each other. It felt poignant to be there again, watching Lucas toss a frisbee with some kids. The sounds of cheerful voices floated in the warm air. "When I think of how much has changed," Julie murmured, her eyes tracing the line of budding trees. "I remember sitting here alone, crying after another job rejection, and there you were, a stranger, offering a tissue I wouldn't take." Mark smiled wryly. "I had no idea you'd end up being the person on the other side of those late-night texts. Sometimes I still can't believe how it all happened. The memory of that wrong number moment hung between them like a gentle reminder of fate's odd ways." Then, Mark's expression grew serious. "Julie, the program I presented at the conference, it's gaining traction. My school wants me to spearhead a district-wide initiative, which could mean stepping away from a normal classroom schedule. It'll be bigger, more responsibility." He paused, letting the significance sink in. "I want that, but it also changes everything. My work hours, my capacity to parent. I can't do it alone." Her heart hammered. She heard his unspoken plea. "You know how I feel," she said quietly, slipping her hand into his. "But I still haven't decided about Springfield. Catherine expects an answer soon." He angled closer. "We've been tiptoeing around the obvious. We want a real future together, right? A shared home, a shared life. Maybe it's time we stop dancing around it." Julie's throat felt tight. She remembered her mother's quiet words of advice, how life wouldn't always accommodate perfect timing, but that true commitment required taking a chance. "If I do stay," she ventured, voice trembling, "if I turn down a full relocation, Catherine might let me do a hybrid arrangement. It won't be easy. I'll still have to travel, but I can keep my base here." Mark squeezed her hand, eyes filling with both hope and relief. "We can handle the travel. We handled everything else so far. And if you ever decide you do want to move in," he broke off, glancing at Lucas, who flung the frisbee with a triumphant cheer, "we could make that a real home for all of us." They paused, the magnitude of the moment stretching like a soft hush. Spring's gentle warmth enveloped them, and the echoes of their past, crying in the park, texting strangers, seemed almost surreal. Yet here they were, full circle, ready to claim the chance they'd stumbled upon. Julie leaned her head against Mark's shoulder, exhaling the anxiety she'd carried for so long. "We'll do it then," she said. "I'll talk to Catherine. I'll figure out a schedule that works, and we'll figure out everything else." He kissed her hair lightly, gratitude flooding him. This time, they'd recognize each other fully, not as strangers or precarious phone confessions, but as two people choosing to build a life side by side. As Lucas ran over, breathless and flushed with happiness, Mark opened his arms to him, feeling a certainty he hadn't known before. They had completed one circle, but life was offering them a path to something even more lasting, a promise that, together, they could face whatever else lay ahead. A full year passed since the day Mark's text had pinged into Julie's phone by accident. The calendar said summer, and Oak Ridge radiated with lush greenery and bright sunshine. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass down quiet suburban streets. On a Saturday afternoon, Mark and Julie hosted a small gathering in the backyard of the new house they'd purchased together, just a few blocks from Mark's old place. The yard was cozy and flowering with hydrangeas, a perfect backdrop for a very personal celebration. Friends and family milled around, sipping lemonade and chatting beneath white balloons that swayed in the soft wind. Eleanor, now living in a small apartment near Cambridge, watched from a garden chair, her eyes brimming with pride. Her health issues were manageable for now, allowing her to fly in for this special day. Edward, the bookstore owner, stood nearby, marveling at how a single handmade book had sparked so much change. And then there was Lucas, sporting a brand new collared shirt, beaming with excitement as he darted between guests. His hair, a little longer now, whipped around his freckled face while he showed off sketches from the children's books Julie was helping publish. Rebecca stood at a respectful distance, exchanging polite words with Mark. She still had a complicated role in Lucas's life, but the lines of communication had opened. Small steps, perhaps, but steps that meant a lot to an 8-year-old boy. The murmurs hushed when Mark stepped forward, motioning for everyone's attention. Dressed in a simple white shirt and slacks, he cleared his throat nervously. At his side, Julie wore a soft pastel dress, her cheeks flushed with emotion. "Thank you all for being here," Mark began, voice wavering slightly. "A year ago, I sent a message to the wrong number, and it ended up being the best mistake of my life. If it weren't for that text, I'm not sure Julie and I would be standing here together now." Everyone chuckled or smiled, glancing at the couple. Julie slipped her hand into his, remembering the swirl of events that brought them to this exact moment. Mark took a breath. "We wanted to do something small, but meaningful today, more a ceremony of gratitude than anything else. Julie, you've shown me what it's like to love again, to hope again, after a time when I thought I couldn't. Thank you." Julie's green eyes shone, and she squeezed his hand. Then she addressed the gathering, her voice soft but clear. "Mark, Lucas, and I have become a family in every sense of the word. Maybe not in the most conventional way, but it's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." At that, Lucas ran up, clutching a small leather-bound book. "Dad," he said, holding it out with a grin, "show her." Mark accepted the book, clearing his throat again. "Right, so, Julie, I've been printing out every text message we ever sent each other from that wrong number day on. I compiled them in this book as a sort of keepsake." Julie's eyes widened as he handed it to her. She opened it gently, skimming the pages, the very first text about the new babysitter. Her confused response, the late-night confessions that followed, each message now etched on crisp paper, evidence of how words can connect lonely souls. Emotions brimmed in Julie's chest. "I can't believe you saved all of these," she whispered, running her fingertips over the carefully typed pages. Mark smiled, his own eyes misty. I wanted a record of how an accidental text led me to the person who changed my life. A hush settled over the backyard. Nearby, a breeze rustled the hydrangeas, and the sunlight caught the white balloons dancing overhead. In that moment, time seemed to crystallize, the year of shared struggles, revelations, heartbreak and joy, all converging into this one perfect instant. They didn't exchange traditional wedding vows that day, but they promised in front of loved ones to continue writing their story together, page by page. Through every challenge, Julie's balancing act between Boston and Springfield, Mark's new role at the school, Lucas's evolving connection with his mother, they vowed to keep believing in second chances and unexpected blessings. As applause and cheers rose, Julie lifted the book of messages to her heart, tears glimmering on her lashes. Some mistakes, she said, voice trembling with gratitude, turn out to be the sweetest beginnings. And so they stood beneath the summer sun, hand in hand, bound by the messages of the heart that had first brought them together. In a world of endless possibilities, their story, born from a simple error, proved that even the most ordinary moments could unlock extraordinary love. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.